Hi, we are Tim
Carolina.
and we are a couple of friends, colleagues, and former coworkers. We love the content, prop tech, housing tech, building products industry. And for the past 15 plus years, we've been bouncing ideas off each other and talking perspectives, residential, commercial, sales, technical, market research, data analysis, and a lot more. If you've been listening for a while, you know us a lot more than that.
That's right. And that inspired us to share our experiences and our guest experiences to broaden perspectives in the construction verse.
Construction
And
verse.
yeah, by Tim. And it's all made possible to you today by Project Fluent. And I'm so excited to introduce you to this next guest who has been a disruptor for a very long time. I think you started when you were 10 because you look extremely young. So let's welcome and get right into it with KP Reddy.
Hey, how's it going?
Great to see
Awesome.
you. Glad to have you here.
Absolutely.
All right. So we are trying to figure out how Tim and KP have met in the past.
I feel like there's a Venn diagram, like a virtual Venn diagram, and we're in each other's spaces sometimes. I'm in the building products manufacturing space, but very involved in prefab and construction technology. And Carolina, our spheres overlap, but KP's activities have really, I think, overlap with both of ours. And with all the things we've been talking about the industry, and I'd probably say I met KP somewhere along the way because it's hard to imagine us not having met. But maybe it's just in my imagination. But I'm glad our circles have finally connected here.
Yeah,
Well,
that'll be fun.
and you're a rambling wreck from Georgia Tech and a hell of an engineer. So,
There's that
that
too.
right there
There's that
gives
too.
you credibility immediately. So tell us about how you got started in the industry. So yes, you went to Georgia Tech, but how did you
Yeah.
get started and how did you land here?
Yeah, so second generation civil engineer. So that's the starting point. And like any good Indian dad, I had to go to the office when I was like 10 after school. And then when I was 13, he bought an IBM PC because one of his professor friends told him computers were the future. And he swiftly handed it to me and said, "Go figure this thing out." So, and then after I did a few things for him, he told all his engineers that I was going to replace all of them because I had this computer. So that was the beginning of the end, so to speak. But yeah, just worked at my dad's firm, and then actually, when I got to college, there was a whole thing. Like, I've been around this business for so long, I was already writing code. Should I get a civil engineering degree or should I get a computer science degree? And because I was
What's
self-taught, because I was
what
self-taught,
was
Mhm.
Sorry, what was the specialization at your dad's
Structural,
office?
structural.
Structural. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So by the time I got to college, I kind of was self-taught on programming. And then I was like, well, I can't like self-teach myself how to design bridges and roads and that kind of thing. So I opted into civil engineering.
There was a time when people self-taught, and I think people pretty soon for those sort of skills. That was probably several centuries or millennia ago, and learned that we actually need math and all those things to back those up. So it's a great confluence of skills having that background along with the self-taught, and really probably helps you have empathy with multiple different stakeholders in the industries and the companies you invest in and people you talk to.
Yeah, it's definitely like both educational and work experience has been very helpful, and also like startup frustration in terms of my startup path was just wrought with frustration with the AEC industry. So I get it when founders tell me that they're struggling to get adoption or visibility or whatnot. I totally get it.
So can you walk us a little bit through what that first startup experience was like for you and how you were able to exit and all the great things that have happened since?
Probably no
Yeah.
difficulty, super smooth. Everything was awesome, like the Lego
Yeah.
song.
Yeah. So it was kind of interesting. I started off like building software on the side. And as a civil engineer, I was making like 36,000 a year. And then my side
Sounds about
hustle
right.
of building stuff was paying more than my day job. And so I finally was like, okay, let me go do this, right? And then essentially came up with the idea of like, why can't we do project management on the web? So this is 1996. So I started building like a web-based project management system, which I went to market and was quickly told by general contractor, everyone in the industry, like, hey, this internet thing is a fad. It's not going anywhere. It's always going to be, we're always print out drawings. This is how, you're nuts, kid. And so I always say my first investor for that startup was Discover. So I'd hit my credit card limit at that point. At that point. It'd be more fun if I had an Amex, but they wouldn't give me an Amex when I was that age. But it'd be like,
Oh,
hey,
yeah.
Amex bought back my first startup would be a much better narrative.
Mm.
But yeah, so I ran out of credit card. I was running out of credit card limits, so to speak, and was super fortunate. I was at a conference and met some guys from WorldCom, and they asked me what I did, and I said like, "Hey, I'm trying to sell this project management software." They're like, well, we're deploying all these switches and routers and everything because the internet's getting big and we're very busy, and we don't have a good way to manage things. So maybe we can use your software for that. And so that's when just things kind of took off. As soon as I shifted into the telecom industry, we went from 2 people to 1,200 people in about 3 years and went public. So changed everything.
Wow, that's amazing.
I think
Right.
I
So
was
when
talking with a
founders
friend of
ask me like,
mine.
oh, it's so hard to get people to adopt, I'm like, yo, like circa 1996, let me tell you how it was.
Uh,
Right, those were early days, and that I think tells us a lot about where we were in the industry. I think maybe I forget sometimes how closely related telecom is to construction, because obviously you need those things for projects, and but it is componentization. Those projects are probably those skills of managing those and using the software for that is portable to many other facets of construction. But that was where that got started.
Mhm.
It's great that you actually got to make that connection.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
and all it
So,
takes is that one project, like that one customer that adopts
yeah,
it.
it's funny. I was just on a board call with one of my companies, and they were talking about this dynamic of running under the radar, right? Because our industry is so project based, and it's like, oh, if my product's only $5,000, a project engineer at a construction company can buy it. They don't have to get permission. And I was like, that's a good thing at the beginning, but if you want to go big, you have to have visibility into the C-suite, right? As a startup founder. And I was like, the easiest way to do that is be expensive. The minute you outprice in a way to say like, oh, our system is actually $50,000 and we have minimum 5 licenses, whatever, then that person either says no, or they say, oh, I have to go talk to my CFO, which means you get to talk to the CFO, which means the CFO knows who you are, right? That's so there's an interesting dynamic. I'm a great student of pricing strategy, both on this the psychographic aspect of it and how you think about um, how you think about value creation in terms of margins and stuff like that. But it's interesting. That's founders want to go big, and they're like, oh, it's a big market, but then oh, my product is $29 a month. It's like you're not going to get anywhere at $29. Like you might get a lot of adoption, but you're not going to go anywhere.
I think that we talk about pricing and building products and talk a lot about indexing and competition. And we were just having this conversation internally at Nichiha about what are we indexing to? And I think historically we've indexed to products that are more commoditized than the products that's more aspirational, and that gets you the attention of essentially the CFO counterparts across the industry when it comes to developers and owners and so forth. And of course that makes a lot of sense for for the software world. I often think that in construction tech, a lot of our folks in mass timber or 3D printing or whatever the case is might be targeting the wrong customers, the mass market customers, when we're really in early days and should be targeting and segmenting and positioning for the 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 custom home, the luxury home, the higher end instead of the affordable home. Everyone wants to talk affordable home and housing. So I was thinking about that with Icon. They originally started talking about, I know you have a big part in that, and originally started talking about these $300,000 starter homes, but found the actual market is in the second move up custom, semi-custom type market, which is a much better target. The cost per square foot, the metrics all are more of a fit for that, as well as the psychographics, the demographics. So you must have found that through these learnings too.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of those things where, I mean, Icon's a great example. Like, we're doing houses overseas and or down in Mexico, and they're very bare bones. And we thought, okay, let's make housing affordable for everyone. And there's multiple challenges with that because, quite honestly, the behavioral change. One of the reasons I invested in Icon. One, I showed up and there were three guys in their backyard screwing around with concrete. I had to show them how to slump concrete. It was just like early days, right? And I was like, okay, these guys are smart and they'll figure it out. So wired them money the next day. But which is kind of like, people don't understand how venture capital is much more artisanal than finance, right? It's a lot of those type of things that you deal with. But the challenge is, I invested in them because I hated this idea of, we're seeing things like, let's get shipping containers and turn those into houses for people, and that'll be affordable. I'm like, so we're literally talking about putting people in shipping containers. Like, let's play that back. That seems odd, right? From a humanity perspective. And so, one of the things you run into, though, is that new and different really has to be pushed into the early adopter phase. And the problem with anything affordable, low cost, et cetera, it's really hard to go after that market with anything new and different, right? There's a bias towards, what did I buy last time? I want to buy it again, right? And just think about like the adoption of the iPhone, right? If they would have gone after like everyday phone users, it would be like, oh, I don't need all this, right? I've never bought this before. Would I buy it now? And so what you find not only is the cost factor of like, it's easier to go sell bigger deals and make more money with higher end, the appetite for experimentation and adoption is very low in the mass market. People want, always tell people there's this pattern. I've seen friends, like, especially like my millennial friends, like, I'm going to go live in town and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to live in this cool part of town where I might get mugged. And that's cool too. And then I asked them, like, hey, where'd you grow up? They're like, oh, I grew up on 50 acres in a creek. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. That's where you'll end up, right? That's where you'll end up. You're going to end up in a very similar spot to how you grew up, versus like you're breaking, it's like, go have your fun in your 20s. When you're in your 30s and 40s and have a family, you'll end up on several acres with a creek. That's where that's the familiar part of it. So it's tough sometimes when you talk about affordability and these new ideas. If you grew up in a certain type of home, that's what you want. So you look at a 3D printed house and you're like, this is not what I imagined. Whereas if you're early adopter and on the edge, like, this is cool, this is different. My friends are going to be so impressed that I've got this thing that looks like something from Star Wars. Different mindset, different demographic, right?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to get adoption.
Yeah, and we see a lot of the construction technology just tracking modular offsite wall panelization. And unless there's some sort of public-private funding or mandate or something like that driving it, and if you just leave it up to free market dynamics, you typically end up with, if you want to get to the laggers or the late adopters, or this is where affordable housing is, and you have a new, unfamiliar, high-priced product, you basically have to pay a lot of money to jump all those barriers. That's basically what it takes: a bunch of advertising, a bunch of rebates and giveaways, whatever it takes to smooth out the friction between here and there. And we try and encourage folks a lot of times, or all the time, to really focus on, where does your product, if you have product market fit, then where does it fit? and who else is in that space. That will be the least expensive route to go. So it's really cool to hear your perspective.
Yeah. And it's interesting. My 25-year-old son, who I think when I invested in Icon was probably in high school, he was a big fan, and he studied mechanical engineering at Georgia Tech. He went to go work for an architect for a little bit, and then was not excited about that. But he just started a new startup a couple months ago called OneBuild. And what he's doing is he's taking all these different methods, these new methods, right? Panels and 3D printing and all this stuff, and cataloging them and turning them into SKUs and vetting them, right? So basically vetting them and then investing in them. So he's kind of vetting them, taking a ownership position in them, and then he's going over to the builders and kind of presenting them as a catalog of sorts. And here's how they interface. And here's what's a best fit for you. And so he's really taking two things. Is one is no one of these companies has 100% of the solution. They're pieces and parts, they're SKUs of a house. So he's figuring out that integration layer and what level of that can be custom. But then on the other side with the builders, they don't have innovation people, right? They don't have people that can go vet all this stuff. And does it work? Doesn't it work? Is it cost effective? So he's going to the builders and doing that, having that conversation and helping them understand impact and what'll work and what won't work for what they're doing. So he's kind of, I would say, educating both sides of it and creating distribution, creating supply chain for the builders and distribution for all these highly fragmented supply chain, right? So but he's been absolutely crushing it. It's pretty wild.
That's extremely fascinating. So I want to stop for a second. I didn't know I didn't know this existed. I just looked it up. And Tim, I don't know if you remember, like 3 or 4 years ago, we were saying, wouldn't it be cool if there was, and this isn't exactly what your son built, but wouldn't it be cool if you had a requirement and then you went through all these questions and then you would kind of land in the material that you needed to select and the top people that can install it and the top GCs that actually specialize in, like, that is amazing. That, like, we were wondering when people were going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he's done. And it was interesting because, he's 25, right? So he's like wanting to write code. Dad, I'm going to build this thing. And I'm like, no. Like this is the people business. Nobody wants to use software. You need to go talk to people, go sit down with that builder, help them understand what their pipeline is, and then say, hey, here's how I think we could execute on those things, and kind of be their project manager, because they don't want to use some software. No one has time for that. No one has time or interest in that, right? And it's like, oh, I clicked on the wrong thing. Now I messed up. It's a different thing. So he's done a really good job too. He's really focused on these, mid-market regional builders. He's like, the big guys are too much trouble to talk to, and they operate at a different scale. The little guys don't have enough volume. So he's kind of figured out these mid-sized regional builders that he's working with. And it's like I said, it's going really, really well.
The adopters in single family and townhomes, I'd say even like the Class A type townhome product, are the best ones are the locals and regionals. And they are also looking for a leg up on the big nationals. They can't command a rebate program, which is mostly the big nationals and publics are mostly rebate program project management driven. They're not really builders anymore. Most of the C-suite and mid management has never had tool bags on in their life, whereas the local builders have. They understand what those are, and they're looking for fit, and they're actually looking, because they don't have an R&D team, like you said. They're looking for a done with you or a done for you type guidance.
Yeah, not. I mean, I can talk about my kids all day, but I will say the other thing, because of his age, and as he thinks about like the demographic of his peers, he's really trying to build some brand around this, right? In other words, he thinks like his age folks are very into brand. So he's been very brand focused around OneBuild, so that John Smith builders, they don't understand maybe brand or any of that stuff. But if he can lend a brand to them that says, like powered by OneBuild or whatever he comes up with, right? That he can now build brand awareness and comfort that people feel like they're in a OneBuild house, even though John Smith builders built it. So anyway, I can go on. That's a whole nother episode.
So, well, in relation to that, you've publicly said that real estate investors tend to make terrible VCs
Yeah.
and that too many real estate people are getting into prop tech, which I also
Yeah.
heard you don't like that term.
No, I hate
So,
prop tech.
so tell us a little bit about that and expand on that for us
Yeah.
because I see that too. I live in a vacation spot area, so.
Yeah. So venture capital by its very nature is you make 10 bets and one works and the other 9 go to 0. And that's a much different mindset, right? That is, I tell people I play roulette and I bet on numbers. Real estate people don't understand the concept of an asset value going to 0 in 2 years, right? I'm very comfortable
Scary.
with investments going to 0 in 2 years. Like to me, like that's winning, right? Oh, we tried, it didn't work out, right? Because the more I lose, I know when I do have a win, like an icon, it's next level, right? I was one of their early investors. You look at what they're worth now, and it was funny. It was my first venture investor, and my boys are just like, "Dad, you should have stopped."
That was good enough.
You
Yeah,
should have
10
stopped
billion, is
there,
that
right?
right?
What's
Yeah.
that?
Is it at 10 billion? Is that where it's at
Uh,
now?
they're high, they're up there, right? But
Crazy.
the
Yeah.
point is, like, I was like, yeah, if I knew that going in, sure, guys. But so that's a different mindset. But can you imagine an apartment developer saying, I'm going to build 10 apartment complexes and 9 of them will not get leased out at all, but only one of them, like, they can't understand that. And by the way, after 2 years it gets demolished, right? Like it just goes to, like, literally to 0. And that is a mindset that is really, really hard to break. And so they ask the wrong questions. They ask about revenue. I never ask about revenue, not for my early stage companies. I care about market size. I care about the problems, this problem set. I care about the dynamics of the problem. I want the problem to be really, really hard. So if someone can build an app to solve the problem, I'm not interested in that, right? So if you look at Icon, it's material science, it's robotics, it's software. I mean, it's all the hardest problems, right? And that's the stuff that I love. We just invested in a company called Monumental Labs. They have robots that create custom stonework. So
Wow.
they're bringing down the price of custom stonework. And what I found, like, super fulfilling about it is, like, gosh, our buildings have gotten really boring. Wouldn't it be cool to have some custom stonework as part of a building? And, just like really kind of, everything's just like glass and concrete these days. It's like,
Mhm.
why can't we do traditional, some more classical architecture? And what everybody will tell you is architects love classical architecture because that's what they studied, right? But it's too expensive. How do I create some custom piece that goes, some custom facade? So that's another one that I'm pretty excited about. So think about that. It's robots like chiseling stone.
Or one of the big constraints is it's not so much like the nuclear industry is in the U.S., where there just aren't the scientists and so forth like there were back in nuclear power's heyday. But now they're sort of trying to figure out, and sort of clunky's trying to get that restarted. But some of those skills for, say, custom stonework,
Yeah.
masonry is one of the trades that has lost the most amount of people.
Mhm.
And young people just are not necessarily that interested. I know that's a blanket
Yeah.
statement, not all the way true, but that's one of the big challenges. We're a facade company, and I talk with our folks in Japan and say, hey, what would be great is if we just had a 3D printed facade, like just go up,
Mhm.
have one person that comes behind, does the sealant and stuff, and just goes up the building and prints right on the building. I know Branch Technology has been doing stuff like that, but there is a desire to ground in those classic materials, but the labor to
Mhm.
do them has been lost. And so
Yep.
because of that, you have a constrained field that can install it. And so therefore the price goes up. And there's a Curved article. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's always sticks in my brain. And it was about, why do all buildings look the same?
Mhm.
And the conclusion, it was Ryan, I forget his name, out of the University of Washington. Anyhow, he said, that basically the conclusion through the study said that it's because people are stuck on the same materiality.
Mhm.
That is the
Yeah.
reason they all look the same. And because
Yeah.
there's so much of the same materiality, you have the same labor doing it all over again using those muscles, but they've lost the muscles to do these
Yeah.
other things. So that's a brilliant, I love that investment. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not to go too off the ranch, but there's if you study like why sushi exists all over America, right? It's kind of odd, right? There's more sushi restaurants in like Kansas City than anywhere in the country. It's about as landlocked as it gets, right? But it had all to do with the distributors, right? These companies like Cisco Foods and all, they create the menus, they create the materials, and say, go start a sushi restaurant. Here's everything you ever needed to know about
Oh
starting a
yeah.
sushi,
That
right?
was just on
So
Bloomberg. Yeah.
yeah, so we see that with the building industry, right? All of a sudden, I have lots of friends at Conair, so not picking on them, but Conair says, "Hey, here's all this great curtain wall systems. It's really cool, isn't it?" And then they influence the architects, and it gets in that little bit of a mind worm, brain worm with the designers. And they're like, "Oh yeah, like this is what looks great, right?" I mean, you drive in Southern Cal, you drive in LA, right? All these houses are like these big white boxes with glass and concrete, and they kind of all look the same. But because you get a volume dynamic there, they also become affordable, right? So if now all of a
Right.
sudden that type of house is very affordable, let's go to a traditional house with custom stonework. Forget it. Like you can't do it. There's not enough volume to make it affordable. So and I'm pretty excited about some of these things being able to bring back. And then even on the investing side, we haven't really done much with material sciences in our industry in a while. And if you see what's happening with AI, people get really focused on AI around, chat GPT and whatever, which is all adorable. But if you look at like what we're seeing with drug discovery, and how quickly we're looking at drug discovery and optimizing the commercialization of drug discovery using AI, I predict a similar thing with material sciences. All these ideas we've had, whether it's graphene tubes or whatever, or any kind of, and even like recycled material, it's always been like, oh, that's really hard to solve and commercialize. I think a lot of these AI tools are going to help us find paths to commercializing some of these materials in our space. Because I think that is the big unlock for our industry, whether it's affordability, sustainability, all the abilities, is going to
Mhm.
be how do we do more with material science in our space.
Yeah, and that brings up the point of adoption too in terms of affordability. And I know that you work with a lot of owners. And I was just at Greenbuild last week in
Yeah.
LA, and it was not super well attended, as it has been in years past. And it made me wonder whether, hey, we're already green. Everybody's got a
Yeah.
sustainability story and it's adopted. Or has the attention been veering in a different direction in terms of affordability? And Tim and I have talked about this in past episodes, but it's been a few years and the industry has changed in the last 2, 3 years in terms of adopting sustainability and adopting sustainable products that are
Mhm.
kind of at a higher price point than
Yeah.
your basic brutalist
Right.
looking
Right.
products.
Yeah, I think it gets back to how we think about adoption, right? When you have a new initiative like sustainability, right? Not that new anymore, but when it was newer, all of a sudden the SKUs, right? Like I do a lot of work with Schneider Electric. Their SKUs probably 15 years ago that were quote unquote sustainable, lead, and all that it was probably like a specialty catalog, right?
Mhm.
Here's our core catalog and here's our green stuff, right? Now it's probably a lot more pervasive that most of the SKUs have some green aspect to them. So it just takes time to mainstream it to bring the costs down. It's kind of like, early days of solar, or I think even like with EV cars, right? I think I'm not a big fan of EV, just so you know, but full disclaimer. But I do think you're going to start seeing EV cars that are under $10,000. And you see companies like Slate Automotive building work trucks that are under $25,000. And that's without the subsidies and all the government help. But it just takes time to optimize these things and build a real supply chain that can serve them at mass, right?
But I can't let go of the comment. So tell us why you're not a fan of EV.
So there's a certain math around how we produce energy and step it up, transmit it, step it down, step it up, step it down. So there's that loss factor. That's one issue. Uh, I don't have clarity, and I've done homework on this, and someone can correct me. I don't have great clarity on what we're going to do with these batteries. They're very nasty. They're very bad, right? So people talk about recycling. I'm like, I still haven't seen that. No one's been clear to me on that. And then the third thing is EV cars are heavier. They're massively heavier, sometimes up to 3 times heavier than the combustion version. Our entire transportation system is not equipped for this. The roadways are not equipped. You start talking about an 18-wheeler being 2 times heavier than a classic 18-wheeler. I don't think we're ready for that. Like, I don't think our infrastructure really, I don't think people really understand the impact on infrastructure. And so I'm not sure that the net impact is that great. I mean, the problem is, like, gas is a very efficient fuel. It's a very transportable fuel. It's just like it doesn't get lost that much in transportation. So, so those are kind of my 3 issues with it. And of course, my kids are like, and Dad, you also love your gas powered cars. So,
So let's just get off topic. What cars do you drive, if you don't mind sharing?
uh,
And
my
what's your dream car? I can tell you my
my
dream
daily
car.
driver is a Wrangler Rubicon, and then
Nice.
my other car is a 911 Targa 4S GTS.
Nice. Nice.
So,
My dream car is a DB9. My husband does drive a Recon,
uh-huh.
a, um, 6-speed Recon.
Yeah.
Very cool. We like it.
I've never. I mean, I used to be a car guy when I was younger. I was a car guy, and I got all the cars. And then I was like, okay, living in Atlanta, I didn't. It just wasn't that much fun having cars in Atlanta. But now that I live on Highway 1 in California, like right off the coast, it's like all. I mean, I love driving here. Right? It's just all I do is drive down the ocean, drive down the beaches every day. I
Yeah,
have
you
like
do
my
someone's bucket list every day.
Yeah, every day I go get a cup of coffee about 15 miles from my house on down the coast, and it's my daily meditation. At least that's what
I
I tell
love
my
it.
wife. Like, I have to go for a drive by myself. It's my daily meditation.
I think we're great getting grounded in maybe the outdoors, the rumble of engines, kind of maybe some people say nostalgia, but I think there's something to how all those things feel. We were at, you probably know Andrew Warner. We were at his place in Austin, and his big thing was having like, instead of a fireside chat with no fire, like you see a lot at times at events, having actual people over to an actual fire and roast stuff and do all those things, because it gets you centered. You're talking to your LPs and your early stage folks and all the people involved, but then being able to just have the window down and driving down Highway 1 it helps us maybe think clearly about things we don't have clarity on, or think of new ideas.
Yeah, I almost bought a ranch a couple months ago, and finally my wife was like, "You can't buy a ranch until you get someone to help you." So we have some property in Asheville. And fortunately, like when we were spending a lot of time there, I had a guy that like helped me with things. My wife's just like, "You're too busy. Like, there's just no way, right?" And she's like, "Find the right person and then go buy whatever you want to buy." But we looked at this like 40-acre property, and part of my vision was, man, I would love to host people here, get 10 or 15 yurts and just like host my founders, host my LPs, and well, I mean, I'll get there, right? I think you mentioned on our pre-call, like, man, you have a lot going on. I'm like, yeah, I do have a lot going
Uh-huh.
on.
Yeah,
But
you do. And well, speaking of
there's something
LPs,
to that though. Oh, sorry, Carolina, go ahead.
no, I think that you guys might know each other through my tech. Aren't you, don't you work with them?
Yeah, my tech's one of my investors.
Yeah, I think Tim, you and I both know people from my tech from like
Yeah, I
Housing
first
Innovation
met
Alliance.
Yeah, I first met them through the Housing Innovation Alliance, Jamie and Scott. And I think probably that's where maybe some of the overlap is in
Yeah.
these different markets. Getting involved with those different, I guess, cohorts is the right thing to say.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, I definitely need to connect you with Andrew. Andrew Warner and I were talking about doing that outside of SF, of setting up where people can just get out from the city, go stay in a year. The kids can run around and play, talk business, don't talk business, sit
Yeah.
around a fire, make your own marshmallows or buy them from the store. Doesn't matter. I was just listening to Joe Rogan's most recent podcast with Russell Crowe. He said that's so key for him with 5 or 6 movies going on at once to just take a month out in the quote unquote the bush, to recharge, get all those energies back up, because otherwise you start to get this diminishing rate of return with the amount of energy you're putting into all these different things. Then you just get spread too thin. But if we get recentered, which I think the industry, we probably need to do that a lot better, is get recentered on these things and the more tactile things. When we go to big events, I mean, it's usually like a trade show and there's a stage, but there's no real like grounding there,
No. No, I have to be in Vegas all next week, and I'm just despising it. And I always tell people, people that don't do this stuff for a living, they're like, "Oh my God, you get to go to Vegas for work?" And I'm like, "It's the worst. It's like literally the worst."
I only go to Vegas for work.
You're never
That's it.
outside. Like you're never really outside. Like there's never outside. And even like the rare occasions when you can get outside, then it's like 1,000 degrees, right? So it's like we had our annual summit this year in Phoenix, and it was an amazing, it was like end of October, so the weather was amazing, and we got to spend a lot of time outside. That was fun.
I'd love for you to tell us about the summit, because that's an important event for the industry. And I know that you add some really cool things in front of it. So tell us about the event, the summit, the AEC summit.
So it's this past month, it was my 9th year hosting our summit. It's mostly like innovation officers, CEOs that show up, and we do it in October for them to help with their strategic planning for the following year. So when they're thinking about what should I invest in, what technology, where should I spend my time, it's definitely a roll up your sleeves and have a keen understanding when you go back to the office. Hey, we need to invest in this and not that type of stuff. So it's really good about that. The day before we started a new event, I don't know if we'll do it again. It was a lot of fun. My team's like, "You're insane." But it was called Vibathon. So we had 18 teams that had never written code before. We taught them how to use the AI coding tools. And then they went to work, and for 6 hours they wrote code. And so out of 18 teams, 14 presented at the end of the day. And it was amazing what they had built. And I've been telling all my startups, it's like, let me tell you, like what these people did in 6 hours, you need to be a little afraid. Maybe not stay up, and maybe it doesn't keep you up at night, but you should start, if I was the CEO of a SaaS company right now, I would clear out 2 days and see if I could code my own software, right? Especially if you're a non-technical CEO, because the technical teams that work for you will tell you lots of stuff, right? It's job security. It's human nature, right? It's nothing negative. It's just human nature. But until a CEO gets on the keyboard and realizes, oh my God, like we have 5 people building this thing. I just built something really close to it in 5 hours. Like, come on, right? Like
There's
a little
no
bit
moat.
more effort, a little bit more effort. I can probably be 100% there. So I think, because my general feeling specific to the AEC industry is all the software out there, people are using maybe 70 to 60% of it to actually be effective. And maybe I'm being generous there. And it's monolithic, right? It's not customized enough for my needs or my firm size or whatever it is I do for a living. And I think you're going to start seeing a lot more people building their own software, just because for what they're paying and the actual use they're getting out of it, it's probably pretty low.
Well, it's interesting. I appreciate you bringing that up and making that point, because it circles us back to earlier in the conversation about these hard problems. Like,
Hmm.
you want to see the hard problems that need to be fixed, and it's not just about writing a quick snippet of code. It's really about the hardware, the people, the problem, and then
Yeah.
maybe the software maybe isn't an afterthought, but it's just
Yep.
part of the story. So you're talking about what you call frontier problems. And so
Hmm.
when you're talking to first time founders and they're coming to pitch you, or you find them in the industry, because I know you're traveling
Hmm.
around in different circles, um, when you're looking vetting them to write a check, what matters most is is it their domain expertise, their previous experience, the problem, the moat, the distribution,
Hmm.
or is it
Yeah.
just all of it or none of that?
Um, it's really what I'm looking for is a pattern of thinking, right? Because there's some things that I would say are generally facts, right? Your first idea is never your final idea, right? So I want to understand their pattern of thought through that journey. Like, hey, I first thought it was going to be X, Y, and Z. And then I spent more time in market and I changed my mind, right? So the ability to be much more pragmatic around decisioning versus, what I see a lot in our industry is like, I worked at Turner Construction for 15 years and here's what I saw. So this is the answer. And I'm like, okay, then. So you're going to sell your product to Turner Construction. Fantastic. You have one client. It's a good client, but it's one client, right? So the ability to take those experiential things and apply it to large markets and not be simplistic in your solution. So I talk about, like, have they spent 80% of their effort studying the problem is what I'm looking for. So I'm heavily biased towards how people have thought about the problem. And then how have they iterated through different solutions to solve that problem? Because my guess is the first time was not the right time, wasn't the right one. So that, and then you just look at big markets, right? How do you get to 100 million in revenue in 5 years? If you can't get there, I can't invest. I'm a venture capitalist, right? That's kind of the goal. Those are the markers. And it's really tough because we've been talking about starting another fund with different economics, but I think a lot of founders, when I'm like, hey, you're not venture fundable, they think that's a negative thing. And I try to explain to them is like, what that means is you could probably build this business and own more of it on your own. You don't need money because so venture capital is the most expensive capital you can find, possibly worse than payday loans, right? So if your idea is not big enough, it's going to be a big enough of an idea to have a big enough impact so that the smaller slice you're left with as a founder is meaningful, you shouldn't do venture capital. Um, and and it's tough because a lot of these founders, it's been ingrained in their head that venture capital is the way, and it's like it's one of the ways. It's one of the ways, and I think in our industry we just have such an inventory of problems to be solved, and very few of them are actually venture fundable. And I try not to discourage founders um, from giving up because they're not venture fundable. Um, and I think that's the paradox these founders live with, right? Success is giving away 40% of your company.
That is such a great perspective because, yeah, not everybody can do it.
Right.
So then they feel discouraged, but it doesn't mean that their idea is not worth pursuing. You can bootstrap. Um, and I think Andrew Warner, actually, he's got a partner and they've got a company called Bootstrapping Giants. And they're saying,
Mm-hmm.
look, you don't necessarily have to go to VC
Mm.
if you don't have to. I like that.
No, and what I've found, my investor base, my strategic LP base is 60 some odd companies, the MyTechs of the world and Builders First Source, and just, on and on and on, right? Um, but what I'll tell you is, I believe, I did a stint in telecom, I've done stints in other industries. And the main reason I decided to like work the rest of my career in this industry is honestly the people, like salt of the earth people, egos in check, actually trying to solve problems. And what that means for a founder is you can get so much support from the industry. Um, the fact that, I mean, I've seen contractors, one of my investors, he probably writes 10 checks a year and he'll call me like, hey, I invest in this company. And I'm like, why? Like, why'd you invest in this company? He's like, I met the founder. I think he's solving a really good problem. He's like, I wrote him a $20,000 check. It's no big deal. It's not going to break the bank. And I'm like, well, he's probably never going to exit. It's going to probably be a nice $5 million a year revenue company and he'll make a great living. And I'm like, that's okay, right? And he's like, yeah, I know, it's fine. I wanted him to be successful, right? And let me tell you, being out here in Silicon Valley, there's not any people writing you checks that just want you to be happy and successful, right? That's not how
Mm,
it works, right? It's like,
that's
no,
right.
I don't know about happy, but you need to be very successful, but you need to be so successful that my investment turns into something. And I think our industry is much more, if they feel like you're doing good work and you're a good person and have the right attitude, they'll back you. They'll write you a check.
Mm, gosh.
One thing that I'm glad about, I guess, in the industry, I was talking with Ray Boff about this a couple of years ago at DPR, and just the 25, 30 years ago at the GC level, at the A and D level, the building product manufacturer level, they're just, and the developers, the big developers, there wasn't, in their vernacular, there wasn't typically the word venture, but they
Yep.
always wanted to do cool things, but not sure like where the funding came from and who would lead the charge. I think that one thing that the VC world has, as this matured, and the common people, that the corner bakery or barber, they know what venture capital like broadly is. That has matriculated into and through our industry. So you have people at these big manufacturers and building material suppliers and so forth that are familiar with, and now there's a framework within their company of how do we get these sort of things done, and it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of okay to put someone in charge of that
Yeah.
at the company. Okay, they may be a corp dev or a pseudo corp dev if we don't have a corp dev department, but they're starting that conversation, which used to be not the case. I remember
Non-existent. Yep.
building materials companies would just launch a new product, not having any voice of customer or like understanding what product market fit, wasn't even in the same sentence, those words. But now I think that's one beautiful thing the VC world and the software world has delivered to our industry, to say, hey, here's a framework for how things get done. Possibly
Mm-hmm.
things could be funded inside your company, or you can team up. And maybe some of these competitive moats, since we're all kind of working on the same problems, has started to sort of not crumble, but the guard up about intellectual property has sort of been less guarded, because we all know that there are so many problems to fix. Why don't we work on some of them together,
Yep.
or we invest in each other's company? You probably have seen less of that like wall up and more of that
Yeah.
crumbling, and you can be a facilitator of that over time.
Yeah. And that's why, honestly, a lot of my thinking, the venture capital business is a good business for us. And that's why I do so many things. But now I'm actually looking at how do I incubate founders? Because one of the challenges in our space is, if you know the industry really well, you probably don't understand the technologies that are available and accessible very well, or how to execute on them. And so, I've got like a top roboticist on my team. The team that I have working for me personally is pretty big and very expertise oriented. So we kind of, are moving towards thinking about actually kind of building like an incubator model where you come with your idea and you study the problem and you think about the solutions, and me and my team will help you build it, right? And you don't have to worry about payroll. And there's certain things I have a foundational belief on, is like, if people can't take care of their home life, they're not going to ever be able to give you their best. And in the world of venture, it's a different mindset. But I would be happy to build, and hopefully I will next year, like 20 companies where I have a founder and, you know, they're building for the long term. We're not looking for an exit. We're just building, solving real problems. And I hope to execute on that. You know, I've got some folks super excited about backing me on it. And that's the other thing you learn is you can't do this stuff by yourself.
That's
I've been very
beautiful.
fortunate. You know, we've got great LPs, and then I have a
Yeah.
couple of very large venture capital firms that have kind of backed me to say anything construction we partner with KP on, and that's been super helpful because they have, you know, they have access to capital, you know, in the hundreds of billions, nowhere where I play.
I love that.
It's
I
great to hear because it's definitely needed. You know, there's this giant delta between all of that, that
Mhm.
thinking of VC and the cap table, and then these grassroots ideas that could have something, or eventually maybe two or three or four. I could just imagine
Yeah.
KP, like in that ecosystem. You see, okay, two, three, four, and seven, they actually go together, and that could actually have some.
Yeah.
Um,
Honestly, my
some
biggest thing, you know, for your listeners, I'm looking for a CEO to lead this stuff up. So if anybody's
all
interested,
right.
do your homework. Working for me is very hard. Um, but I don't even want to look at Glassdoor when it comes to people working for me. But I run hard, you know, my team, I drive them insane. I'm up at like 4 a.m. working and I work nonstop. And they're like, when do you actually, I'm like, and they're like, oh, and you write 1,000 words a day and you do a podcast? And I'm like, yeah, yeah. So got to keep up.
Pretty consistently. And you've written how many books? At least three
Three
that I know.
books. Yeah, three
Yeah.
books. I'm
Yeah,
working on my
absolutely.
fourth right now. It's been an intellectual stretch because it's fiction.
Nice.
So I was feeling very uninspired in the writing another business oriented book or a technical book, and so I was like, let me try my hand at fiction and see what happens.
All
I
right.
think
I look forward to
Elihu,
it.
the author of The Goal, which is one of my favorite
Yeah, Eli.
business books ever, that I think he kind of went through that same thing,
Yeah,
right? Like how okay, now I'm going to do this fiction thing, was and such an enjoyable thing to read compared to Jack Welch's book. You know,
yeah,
just for me in anyway, because I love the story, I love the tension, you know, between he and his wife, and you know, trying to get these things done and figure out the bottlenecks, the non-bottlenecks, and so
Is this
yeah.
the beer book?
The Goal.
That's the, is that the one with the beer company?
Maybe, I
Or is
don't
that
know.
I'm
Been
thinking
a
of a
while.
I
different
don't
book.
actually remember what the actual product was, but it was good. Well, that's exciting to hear.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that. That is going to be a huge, I can just see that being a huge
Gotta
meaning
get it
maker.
done.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, that's one thing that I force myself to read fiction because I read so much nonfiction, and I know that fiction really can push us to think in different ways, in ways that like actual nonfiction doesn't, because
Yeah.
you're just grabbing someone else's thoughts and ideas. All right, so we are coming up on time. I could talk to you for a few more hours, and we'd love to have you back because we didn't get to
Yeah.
talk about all the things we wanted to talk about. But before we wrap up, we always ask this question of our
Mhm.
guests, and I think you've given us a lot of really good nuggets already. But if we
The
haven't talked
Carolina
about it,
question.
yes, what is an inconvenient truth or something that we should be talking about or thinking about, but you don't think that we are?
I think most of the leadership in these organizations are solid C plus leaders. And
Boom.
it's I think functionally because it's just too much within, you know, within the space, right? I think it's important to have lots of outside influences. And I'm not saying that like there's some great leaders, but so much of the leadership in our industry is just by being here the longest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Would you
agree.
ever put a 45-year-old in charge of a civil engineering firm? Like, doesn't happen. It's like
Mm.
it's more like so, you know, it's a weird, it's not even meritocracy. It's like outlast, outlive. It's like Survivor.
Or out
Um,
backstab sometimes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, and I think that's why if you look at, like I always tell my team, no offense to anybody on this call, but when they write marketing material, I'm like, our ICP is a 65-year-old white man. So maybe don't use that edgy word, right? And I think that's why why is most of the leadership like 65-year-old white men? It's because they've been there the longest, right? So it's nice to see some firms not just operating off the you've been here the longest and now it's your turn to be CEO. So it's getting there, but that's one of those things that people don't love to talk about.
I love that spice. I love
Yeah,
that.
thanks for
Thank you for
sharing
saying
that.
that.
It means a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All
Uh,
right. So we will let people know how we can. Well, you tell us, how do you prefer that people find you?
you can go to kpreddy.co to learn about all the things I publish a lot and all that. And if you just Google KP Reddy, you'll find my Substack and all those things. And then you can always just email me at kp@kpreddy.co.
Awesome. Thank you.
So
Thank you so much once again.
KPREDDY
Yep.
.co.
Yep.
Got it.
And we will have that in the show notes, as well as your books, and point to some of the cool stuff that you've done, and your podcast, which you do pretty consistently too. All right. So this podcast is made available free to you, our listener, thanks to support from Project Fluent.
And thank you so much, KP, for being here today. And if you love Build Perspectives, please reach out and connect with him on his website. And please connect with us on LinkedIn. Like, comment, subscribe, all the things on whatever platform you listen on, because your ratings, reviews, and notes through text message or emails, and we get them all, really help us to not only grow our audience, that's kind of secondary to helping us create content that is needed, helpful, relevant, and valuable.
And yes, let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. And hopefully, this has been entertaining architectural engineering and construction talk and fresh perspective, something that Tim's dad says you can never have too much of. And I agree. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
Everybody. Thanks, KP.